Lumen Field, originally called Seahawks Stadium, originally broke ground back in 1998, opening in July of 2002, around 21 years ago. It has withstood the test of time and still today is a very solid stadium, which is interesting when you compare it to the last two stadiums I looked at, the Cleveland Browns Stadium and Nissan Stadium, both either needing a significant upgrade or being replaced altogether. The Seahawks originally playing their home games at the Kingdome from 1976. They needed a new place to play considering multi-purpose stadiums were completely obsolete, and the Kingdome itself was considered one of the worst multi-purpose stadiums in all of sports. The original construction of Seahawks Stadium included two massive overhangs you can see during the construction process, them going up. So it's not a retractable roof stadium, but it does incorporate the idea of keeping some of the fans safe from the elements. Obviously in Seattle, they get a ton of rain. In the United States, Seattle is kind of known as the rain capital, so you can see those two giant overhangs. It's interesting. We understand this stadium, really, its heyday, I would say, was when it was called CenturyLink Field from 2011 to 2020. That's with the whole Legion of Boom, Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman, the crazy great defense, the Pete Carroll, the prime era with Russell Wilson, the Super Bowl victory over the Denver Broncos. At home, it was, by far the best home field advantage out of any stadium from like 2011 to 2016. And part of the reason it was so loud, they actually broke the noise record there. I can't remember if Arrowhead re-broke it after they had broke it, but I know Seattle broke it. Part of the reason they were able to do it is because those overhangs are able to trap the noise and project it back downward, and it really makes for a more haunting environment. And that's why also Husky Stadium for Washington gets really loud, because they also do have overhangs. But the original purpose of the overhangs really is to, you still want the natural light, you still want the open air feel to it, and you're going to get the precipitation on the field, but you're also going to protect some of the fans from the elements because it does rain there a ton. It's like the best of both worlds. Another interesting thought, when building this stadium in the late 90s, they made it so it could be expandable by around 8,000 seats. And the idea in the initial renderings, and you can see some of the models actually show different seating configurations than the final product. Now, that is pretty typical with different designs. They do tend to alter them, but it is interesting. They originally built this with the idea it could possibly host a Super Bowl. It has never really expanded for any football game up to the total max it can expand and kind of add on extra extended seating if they were to host a Super Bowl. Do I think this stadium can ever host a Super Bowl? No, I do not. And I understand East Rutherford got a Super Bowl. That was kind of a one-off thing. The NFL is really not going to take a chance, especially with the rise of all these super stadiums, with the new Nissan Stadium, with the translucent roof entering the mix. SoFi Stadium's going to have the Super Bowl probably in 4 or 5 years again, and you also do have Las Vegas. They're entering the mix with their brand new stadium, so I don't think this stadium will ever see a Super Bowl, although it would be really cool. And based on the weather, when you're talking about early October, they could get lucky and it could be 60 degrees, honestly, in Seattle. Now, it could also be 40 degrees and rainy. That's part of the issue, and it tends to rain, a lot during the winter. But either way, it doesn't look like they're going to be getting a Super Bowl. Another interesting thing about this stadium, they do host a ton of soccer. They always seem to be hosting soccer during the summer. They've hosted different World Cup qualifiers. The Seattle Reign, the Seattle Sounders, the Washington Huskies played here for 2 years, and also the Seattle Sea Dragons, the XFL team. This is their home stadium. You can see what they tend to do whenever they host a soccer event. They will tarp off the entire upper deck because obviously the capacity for a smaller, tier soccer game, you're not going to need 75,000 seats. That is for sure. When it comes to this stadium, the general vibe, the general feel, certainly it has its pluses. I really don't think this stadium has too many negative qualities about it. It kind of reminds me of the Philadelphia Eagles Lincoln Financial Field. It's a very solid stadium that doesn't get talked about a lot now. It used to always be in the news just because of how loud it was, but now it's kind of fallen into kind of a relevancy just based on the fact that the Seahawks aren't very good. Also, the idea that it is in the Pacific Northwest, really out of the way. Seahawks also obviously are not going to be getting very many big-time games, although they did just host the Thanksgiving game here and that did not go well for their team. But overall, this is a very solid stadium, and I will say it is kind of unique because not only do you have the two massive overhangs spanning each sideline, you also do have the pyramid, which is a very cool stadium cork. I think more NFL stadiums should take advantage of interesting seating designs behind their one end zone. You know, Louisville football has something similar to this where they have a really interesting configuration, but it basically is a pyramid seating design behind the one side. And then if you actually look on the outside of the stadium, there is a massive wall of stairs going up it where everyone can kind of conjugate and go in and really do a good job of controlling the foot traffic in terms of that. There have been minor renovations to this stadium, a few areas in the upper deck, adding some standing rooms and things like that, but really nothing crazy. So this stadium right now sitting 22 years old, no crazy renovations dumped into it. The original cost of it was around $430 million. That was the entire complex. You can see its location right next to T-Mobile Park, formerly Safeco Field. That's typical when it comes to cities putting their stadiums right next to each other. And when it comes to the future of Lumen Field, we're kind of at a rare gray area. Normally, with stadiums nowadays, they reach their 2-decade-old mark. We start talking about renovations. It starts becoming more and more obvious of things that need to be done to save the stadium and prolong the stadium for another couple decades. But with Lumen Field, I really don't see any issues with it. My expectation would be possibly in 7 to 10 years, there would be probably a minor renovation. I don't really see any issues with the seating configuration. Obviously, when it comes to having a roof, could you possibly talk about already, having part of the roof in place if you really wanted to actually have a massive overhang or even maybe a retractable roof? It's like you've already got half of the retractable roof, but no, that's easier. That's easier said than done. You're not going to be able to put a retractable roof on there without significantly investing into it, probably around $500 million. But I guess if the Seahawks, they really wanted to go all out, make it a completely closed stadium, that would be the next step in terms of a major renovation. Other than that, I don't see the need to really do anything with the seating configuration. I mean, certainly there are some weird configurations. Nothing really sticks out in terms of a massive change. I think if they really want to, they can possibly try and add a roof, although we hear that a lot. Although, let's be honest, it is Seattle. You would think that'd be the one place with roofs going up everywhere that would need it. Right now, Lumen Field certainly is standing up in terms of the test of time, although the dialogue for a possible roof stadium for Seattle and possibly trying to get bigger events to the city, that could enable them to try and think about either adding a roof to Lumen Field or maybe a new stadium altogether. Some of these stadiums only lasting around 30 years. Lumen Field right now at 21 years. How much longer does it have before people start considering a massive renovation, possibly closing it up? Would it be easier to add a retractable roof with the overhangs already in place? Would it be harder? Would you have to take the overhangs completely off? These are questions that are going to need to be answered if they wanted to do something like that. This is all just hypothetical. There's been literally no talk of any major renovation to Lumen Field, although we do understand it is 21 years old, and at some point that dialogue will be had, I am sure. T-Mobile Park does have a retractable roof, the baseball stadium located right next to Lumen Field, but it is an open retractable roof where it's really not climate controlled. The roof is basically just an umbrella as air circulation and wind can flow throughout the stadium. I wonder if they would consider something like that, although if you did something like that, that would completely... I mean, maybe you could host a Super Bowl with something like that, although it would... You're not going to have the climate control on the interior. Either way, I do think Lumen Field, a little bit of an underrated stadium, very solid. It has some cool corks, some nice features. It does a really good job of trapping noise in, and it presents itself pretty well. The most interesting features probably being the giant overhangs or possibly the pyramid seating behind one of the end zones. They did also recently introduce new LED exterior lights. You can see the way they utilize the lights lighting up the top of the overhangs. A very impressive design. Underrated facet of stadium, lighting them up at night, getting some nice exterior lights. Looks very impressive, but either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.